Hey everybody, Agent of Doubt here, and it's time once again for another ramble. This time again, one of my adventures in grad school. So I was researching post-traumatic stress disorder, and I was looking for specifically a test for one symptom that can happen with PTSD. Which is alexithymia, and there are measurements out there, assessments that you can give clients, but I could not find one listed in a mental measurements yearbook where these sort of assessments are reviewed, kind of like peer review in journals for scientific studies. Now, in reviews for things in the mental measurements yearbooks, you'll find studies in the bottom of each review, basically. So they kind of work in tandem with journals when you're looking at a mental measurements yearbook. You're just basically looking for the best test to give the client that you have for the symptom that you think they need to be tested for, right? So, I wasn't finding anything for the specific symptom that I was looking for, so I just decided to look through all the different assessments that were listed for PTSD, and I found one that was really strange to me, because it does not measure for PTSD, and it does not measure for any symptom of PTSD. Instead, it measures something else related to it. So the MENT, that stands for Morel Emotional Numbing Test for Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder, 3rd edition. That's which one we're on right now. It's an assessment tool to root out clients who are exaggerating their symptoms to achieve a disability rating for their own reward. It's basically a test for malingering intent. The reward sought out by the client could be, they're trying to get a higher disability rating from the VA to get paid out more, or Social Security disability insurance. Whichever the case, it's basically just trying to find people who are trying their hardest to game the system and get a disability payment when they don't deserve one. So, the need for the MENT, it kind of originates from the self-reporting nature of symptoms that you would assess that make up the criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder. Given that disability rating for a PTSD diagnosis can result in a substantial payout to the client, their incentive to exaggerate those symptoms can be a very great temptation. And so, since you're relying on their self-reporting, we need something to gauge how well they're relaying their real symptoms versus made-up symptoms or exaggerating their symptoms. So this is how it works. Step 1, deception, right? So the client has already been given tests of their actual PTSD criteria, and you're wanting to know, is that assessment that we just gave them for PTSD valid? Well, you approach them and say, okay, this is another test that we want you to do. We want you to do this thing called the MENT. And the deception part is, they say, PTSD sufferers do poorly at being able to recognize the feelings of other people that they're expressing. So we're going to measure the extent of your disability in that regard. All right? So a series of standard photos is shown this person. Kind of like, remember the Rorschach test with the ink blots? Only this is like pictures of someone smiling or someone frowning, crying, And with each one, it's a multiple choice answer. And you get stuff like, is this person happy, grumpy, bashful, or sleepy? And then you have to answer. And basically the test is so easy that anyone that tries to take it with good intent is going to get between 95 and 100% on it. The only people that fail this test are the ones who bomb it. It's been tested with schizophrenic people, autistic people, all sorts of different people. Basically, the only people who do worse than 95%-ish on this test are trying to bomb the test. So if somebody were to get, say, a 60% right on it, that person is trying to fake their symptoms. So they're never told that the test is normed so that anyone taking the test, even people with PTSD, will perform very well on the test. And basically, if they perform poorly, then you don't have as much validity, to back up the test that they already took. Because you figure if they're willing to fool you on this test, which it has been normed so that everyone can pass it. It's the faces are just as easy as I just did for you guys. Then they must be faking on everything else. That's the assumption, right? So on its face, it really seems to be measuring credibility, and by extension, malingering intent. The test is meant for people between the ages of 18 and 87. It was first kind of standardized on middle-aged male veterans seeking care for PTSD, but it has been studied further, and the scope of it has been extended to pretty much everyone who's an adult. So yeah, it's difficult to say like who should be using this test, because itself it's so simple to do. You would just have to be good at the preparation part of being able to deceive your clients. But the test that it would normally be accompanying would be level C, meaning you'd have to have a master's degree and a license in order to give someone the actual assessments for PTSD, to actually give them a diagnosis. So I would assume that you would need to be level C to be able to do this test on top of it, because why would you be using it if not for validating the scores on a previous assessment for PTSD? But when I looked at the website for this assessment, I was kind of taken aback by the reviews, the testimonials that are actually on his website. Mr. Morell, the author of the assessment. Well, the very bottom review on it was basically saying this assessment could also be used in law enforcement, because clients who, sorry, not clients, I guess suspects in their case. I keep calling them clients, but in other professions they don't call them that. So suspects who've been arrested for like violent crimes or for crimes where something big happened, they sometimes claim like they had amnesia or they saw red, they can't remember, right? So you could give them the MENT and then see if they're actually faking those symptoms, because you test them for the symptoms that they're saying, oh, I have amnesia, and then you give them the MENT, and if they bomb on the MENT, then you have a pretty good idea that they might have been bombing on that other test in order to get out of facing the consequences for their actions, basically by claiming a defense of insanity, right? So now I'm like, okay, this has gone outside of the realm of just psychotherapy. Now it's a tool that it can also be used by law enforcement, as long as it's something that the suspect is claiming that they have some sort of mental handicap that happened to them that is similar to the kind of symptoms that you could tell somebody who had PTSD that they might be suffering from and have them believe it. They're intrinsically in the setup for getting this to work. You have to have some buy-in from that person that they believe that you are testing for what you are testing for. But I don't know, this instrument, taking it out of psychotherapists' hands and giving it to an interrogator, it seems like we've crossed an ethical boundary as far as like what we're creating these assessments to do, to help people, not to help prosecute them, But also, while we're on the subject of ethics, I felt like if you tell a person, no, we're not going to be diagnosing you with PTSD because we gave you this other test, and that was a test we didn't tell you before, but now we can tell you that was a test to see if you've been lying to us, and now we think that you're lying, so we are not going to give you health care for this thing that you have claimed, and you're not going to get a rating that would have paid you out money every month. When you do that to a person, I don't know that they're going to trust their healthcare providers ever again. Right? It's really, really burning the bridge that, of this this provider-client relationship that we're supposed to create, And also, on top of that, can you imagine how violent someone might be able to get if you hit them with this, that you tricked them, and now they're not going to get the health care that they were looking for? That's just, wow. I don't want to be in that room. That's setting up everybody for a very dangerous thing, unless you send them home and then you call them, and say, oh, and by the way, don't bother coming up to our floor ever again. Security will stop you. Because I'd be pissed if they told me, it looks like your scores are such that you're a liar. You're a lying liar who lies and makes things up. So, in order to get this test, which it doesn't seem like there's that much to it. It costs $327 for a complete kit, right? So you get this manual, you get 25 forms in order to pass out and test people. You get the unlimited test uses, so I guess maybe you can photocopy the forms that they do give you. But you get a chart that says, this is how many correct answers we expect from everyone, and if they fall below this many correct answers, then they're obviously faking it, because everyone can do this. And you can use that if you're called into like a court of law to defend your findings, because of course this is probably, this is America. Of course they're going to get litigious about something like that, because you're making a judgment call on their credibility, which is going to affect their income, because they're not going to get disability, The last thing that I had as a thought about the MENT basically was, I understand the point of view, like myself being a disabled vet who got a very low disability rating from the VA when I got out of the Army. And I felt like, should I appeal this decision? Because it seems like all of the criteria that they would have needed to give me a little bit higher disability rating was right there in my medical records, and they chose not to see it. That's what happened to me. So I kind of understand when veterans don't trust the VA in giving them the health care that they need, because you really do have to be a squeaky wheel, right? I just don't get the impetus for creating this in the first place, because when I looked in the mental measurements yearbook at all of the research that happened before this assessment came out, one of the things that led to the development of this assessment in the first place was a book from 1998 which said 75% of disabled vets have exaggerated their impairment or outright condition. That book was by Burkett and Whitley. And that seems like a very extremely high amount of malfeasance on the part of military veterans that have served our country. I don't like being put in that category, of military veterans when, you're thinking, wow, 3 out of 4 people who are disabled vets, they're faking at least part of their symptoms in order to get better disability ratings. I'm like, wow, that just doesn't seem right. I didn't sign up to serve my country, to try to rip it off. So then there was this unpublished paper that revised that to about 55%, which is a little bit more than half of the veterans, which to me is still unbelievably high. I think more research into the validity and reliability of PTSD assessments maybe needs to happen versus measuring malingering. It's I get this feeling that's not very dignified. I feel like I'm a potential fraud suspect when I look at how this kind of testing could be used on me, because they're figuring, all that bad shit that you said has been happening to you, we don't know whether we want to believe you. But I'm sure that when properly utilized on a mass scale, validity increasing instruments can assuage the public and clinical concerns about malingering and stolen valor among disabled veterans and even civilians, because, this could be somebody trying to get, payments from Social Security disability too. PTSD does not just happen to soldiers, if you're still of that mindset. But yeah, when I was trying to evaluate the MENT, it kind of helped me understand that I should look a little bit closer at reviews and the statistics reported about these instruments, because at face value, I just found it so hard to believe that 75% of veterans were faking it, and so therefore we need this new assessment to test whether or not they're faking it, The MENT just boasts really great reliability numbers, basically because it's made to. It's made to be something where everyone, if they're trying, can pass it. And the pictures that they would have had that maybe a few more people would have been confused about, they just eliminated that from the test. So the 20 pictures that you're shown are so Loctite easy to get what that person is feeling just by looking at the picture, that that's why they have great reliabilities, because it's made that way, and it's hard to do with tests that are testing specific symptoms of a mental disorder. But this is not doing that. This is testing your intent to deceive the professionals that are trying to give you care. So it was a little bit easier for them to work the test up to where it's definitive. If you fail this much, then maybe you gave it enough of a try to think that you were looking impaired, but at least trying. Nope, they know you're faking it. I also gained kind of a new appreciation for the control of these assessments. I realize that my audience here is very small, but and it's kind of a niche on the internet where people can listen to my rambles and get something out of it. But it's difficult for the layperson to actually acquire many of these assessment instruments that we might use as clinicians. And that's a good thing, right? Because if news of the MENT got around, basically that it's a deceptive lie detector test that's being used against veterans, if word spread, say, on a Facebook group for veterans who suffer from PTSD, then the test would be meaningless, because it requires some deception up front. And if everybody knows what the test actually does, then it doesn't work anymore, right? Because if you knew that they were looking for you to try to deceive them, you would just do as well as you normally would, even if you were being deceptive on every other part of your examination. So it's important to have control over these assessments, because some of them require deception, and some of them, let's say the MMPI, okay, that's basically the test that you would give someone to see if they're a psychopath, right? What would happen if a copy of the MMPI or the handbook for it were placed in the library of a prison where violent offenders were being held. Then they would get some insight as to what you're testing for, and if they wanted to game the system to try to get an earlier release, they would know what to say, right? So it's really given me a new appreciation for just control of these assessments, and how if you buy one, you shouldn't be spreading it around. Some of these tests should be hard to get. I guess that's all my thoughts on this. Links in the description box. Comment, and I will answer when I can. And I'll talk to you later.